Hey, curious minds, welcome back to the deep dive.
Hmm.
Ever feel like you're just stuck on a treadmill, putting in endless hours, but not really getting anywhere? Or maybe, despite all that effort, you're just not hitting your full stride, personally or professionally.
It's such a common feeling, isn't it? That sense of being, busy without being truly effective.
Exactly, like you're just spinning your wheels.
Right. We often mistake activity for accomplishment. And while that can lead to this pervasive sort of underlying frustration.
Totally. So today we're taking a deep dive into Stephen R. Covey's seminal work, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We're specifically pulling insights from his 25th anniversary edition.
A foundational text for so many.
For sure. And our mission, as always, is to extract that core wisdom, those really impactful nuggets of knowledge that have influenced millions globally.
And it's important to stress this isn't just about picking up a few productivity hacks,
Really?
It's really about a profound shift in how you see yourself and the world around you.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack some surprising facts, explore these universal values that really do stand the test of time, and provide practical insights for those aha moments.
Those moments that can genuinely transform your approach to everything, your life, your work, your relationships.
Think of it as maybe a shortcut to becoming truly well-informed about personal effectiveness, but without feeling overwhelmed by, all the information out there.
Okay, so let's unpack this foundational work. Let's try and get off that treadmill and into a more purposeful stride. So when The 7 Habits first hit the shelves back in '89, it really wasn't just another self-help book, was it?
No, definitely not. It immediately garnered widespread acclaim. Leaders across incredibly diverse fields praised it for its, profound impact.
It seemed to tap into something really fundamental.
I think so. And what's truly fascinating is how universally its principles are recognized. Take Søren Dahl Thomsen, CEO of AP Pension in Denmark.
Okay.
He highlighted the book's ability to, unite people within an organization, blending local wisdom with the corporate culture.
Interesting.
Yeah, fostering this truly contributive spirit. He saw it as unleashing employees to be objectively honest and open, really driving towards market leadership.
He called it walking the talk, didn't he? Not just ideas, but a practical tool for building trust and good governance.
Exactly. And it wasn't just business leaders. Arun Gandhi from the Gandhi Worldwide Education Institute.
Right.
He noted its power to reveal that inner strength that all of us have but seldom realize. He saw it leading to a deeper moral realization of life's meaning beyond just, material success.
And figures like Jim Collins.
Yeah, the good to great author. He's consistently called it one of the most important books of our time. He even used Bill Gates as an example, suggesting his success wasn't just luck, but his proactive response. That's habit one to a pivotal moment.
It makes you wonder, how did a work with such universal impact actually come together? It's easy to just credit Stephen Covey.
Right, but it was really a deeply collaborative effort. He was very clear about acknowledging the significant contributions of many people.
Like his editor, Bob Asahina.
Yeah, who helped him distinguish between writing and speaking, which is crucial, and his devoted assistants, Shirley and Heather Smith and Rebecca Merrill. Her sensitivity and skill apparently profoundly shaped the final book.
And Ken Shelton, K-Swim. Lots of people involved.
Absolutely. And this recognition of others' contributions, it actually underscores the humility and the principle of collaboration that's so central to the book's message itself.
That makes sense. It's built on interdependence right from the start. And it's crucial to think about the timeless relevance of these habits, especially when you consider how much the world has changed since 1989.
Oh, massively. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the shift from the industrial age to the information age, the internet, constant connectivity.
Life is just undeniably more complex now, right? More
Yeah.
stressful, more demanding. Challenges we couldn't have imagined decades ago.
Totally. Yet, despite all these dramatic shifts, the core principles in the 7 habits, they remain profoundly relevant. They offer these universal, unchanging truths that help individuals, regain control of their destinies, choose their own future, rather than just being swept along by everything.
And that's where it really hits home, I think. These habits remind us of our true nature, that we are in charge. We're responsible for our choices.
We're the programmers of our own future, as Covey puts it.
Yeah. It's about remembering that fundamental power we possess, regardless of what's happening externally.
So if we're going to talk about effectiveness, we really have to start with how we see the world.
Okay.
And that brings us to this fundamental concept Covey introduces, paradigms.
Paradigms, right. So basically, a paradigm is just a mental map. a model or framework we use to understand things.
Exactly. But the critical insight, the real kicker, is Covey's point that the map is not the territory.
What does that mean, practically?
Well, imagine trying to navigate, say, Chicago, but you've accidentally been given a map of Detroit.
Oh boy. Yeah, you'd be completely lost,
That's
frustrated.
Utterly frustrated and totally ineffective. And that's precisely what happens in life when our mental maps, our paradigms, are inaccurate.
Okay, I see. And we all have tons of these maps, right?
Mhm.
Maps of realities, how things are, and maps of values, how things should be.
And we interpret everything through these maps. Often, we're not even aware they exist, let alone questioning their accuracy. We just assume our view is the objective reality.
Which explains why people can look at the exact same situation and see completely different things.
Absolutely. And this leads perfectly into Covey's famous old woman, young woman demonstration he used.
Ah, yes, the ambiguous drawing.
Right. He'd condition students to see either a young woman or an old woman in this drawing. Then when he showed the composite image to both groups,
Communication breakdown.
immediately, total breakdown. Each person was absolutely adamant that their view was the correct one, the only one.
So what's the key takeaway from that? That our perception is just locked in.
It shows how powerful our paradigms are. Even when you become aware that another viewpoint exists, it's remarkably difficult to genuinely step into a different frame of reference.
It really highlights that idea. We see the world as we are, not as it is.
Exactly. We don't see things objectively. We see them through the lens of our own conditioning, our experiences. So when others disagree, our default assumption is often that something's wrong with them.
Okay, so how do we move towards being more objective then, if our maps are inherently subjective?
Well, it starts with increased self-awareness. Becoming aware of our own basic paradigms, our maps, our assumptions, and where they came from.
Taking responsibility for them.
Yes. Taking responsibility, testing them against reality, and crucially, being open to understanding others' perceptions. That openness is what leads to a larger, more objective view of the actual territory.
And this is where the idea of a paradigm shift comes in, that aha moment.
Precisely. A paradigm shift is a profound break from old ways of thinking. Like Thomas Kuhn described scientific revolutions, it's not just tweaking behavior, it's a fundamental shift in perception.
And these shifts create really powerful changes in our attitudes, our actions, our relationships.
Covey illustrates this so powerfully with his subway anecdote. Remember that one?
Vaguely.
Remind me. He's on a subway, and there's a man whose children are being really disruptive, loud, running around, annoying everyone. Covey feels irritated, judgmental.
Yeah, you would.
Right. His initial perception is insensitive father, lack of responsibility. But then the father quietly explains they've just come from the hospital where the children's mother died an hour ago.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Instantly, Covey's entire perception shifts. Irritation vanishes, replaced by sympathy, compassion. He sees the situation, the man, the children, completely differently.
His map just redrew itself in an instant.
Exactly. And this spontaneous shift highlights a core principle Covey calls seeing and being.
Seeing and being.
To see his own son differently later on, Covey realized he and his wife had to be differently first. They had to invest in their own character growth.
So paradigms and character are inseparable. Changing how you see requires changing who you are.
That's the core idea. It's the essential power of quantum change, that deep inside-out transformation.
Okay, this seeing and being connection flows right into a really fundamental distinction Covey makes, doesn't it? The character ethic versus the personality ethic.
Yes, it's a critical distinction. He researched about 200 years of success literature and found something interesting.
What was that?
Much of the material from, say, the last 50 years before he wrote the book felt superficial to him. He called it social image consciousness, techniques, and quick fixes, with social band-aids and aspirin.
Social band-aids and aspirin. I like that. So just temporary fixes.
Exactly. These approaches address the acute problems, the symptoms, maybe temporarily, but they leave the chronic underlying issues completely untouched.
So the problems just keep coming back.
Again and again. He gave a personal example with his son and baseball. He and his wife tried using positive mental attitude techniques to encourage him,
Right.
but they realized their motivation was actually rooted in the personality ethic. Their own image as good, successful parents was subtly more important than their son's actual well-being in that moment.
Ouch. That's a tough realization.
It is. And it highlights the difference between what Covey calls primary greatness, that deep integrity, the fundamental character strength, and secondary greatness.
Yeah, secondary greatness.
Things like personality growth, communication skills, positive thinking techniques, those are beneficial, absolutely. But they're not the foundation.
They're the icing, not the cake.
Sort of. Without the primary traits, without that deep character foundation, life's challenges will eventually cause your true motives to surface, and that leads to failure in relationships, in long-term effectiveness.
Okay, so if the personality ethic is superficial, where do we find the solid foundation?
In the character ethic. And that, Covey argues, is built on universal principles. These aren't just nice ideas. He sees them as natural laws in the human dimension.
Like gravity. Unchanging.
Exactly. As real and unchanging as physical laws. Think about principles like fairness, even young children have an innate sense of it, or integrity, honesty, human dignity, service, quality, potential, growth.
Things that just are. You can't really argue with them.
You can try, but it's like arguing with a lighthouse, as Covey illustrates with his battleship analogy. The lighthouse represents these unchanging principles. You can't negotiate with it. You either align with it or you run aground.
So the closer our mental maps, our paradigms align with these principles, the more accurate and functional they become.
Precisely. And that impacts our effectiveness far more deeply than any superficial attempts to just change our attitude or behavior on the surface.
This also connects to the idea of growth and avoiding shortcuts.
Right. Absolutely. All of life involves sequential stages of growth. A child learns to crawl, then walk, then run. You learn basic piano scales before you play a concerto. Each step takes time. You can't skip them.
But the personality ethic often promises we can skip them. A quick fix.
That's its allure. But trying to shortcut these natural processes,
Yes.
trying to play tennis like a pro just by thinking positively, or pretending you have concert-level piano skills, it only leads to disappointment and frustration. It's fundamentally contrary to nature.
Covey used an example with his daughter's toys, didn't he, about sharing.
Yes, a great illustration. He felt pressured by other parents' opinions, wanting his daughter to share her new toys immediately, so he forced her.
Okay.
He later realized this was borrowing strength from his position, his authority as a parent.
Borrowing strength. What's the danger in that?
The key insight is, borrowing strength builds weakness. It reinforces dependence on external factors. It stunts the development of internal discipline in the person being forced, and it damages the relationship. Fear replaces cooperation.
And what happens when that external source of strength, size, authority, status is gone?
Exactly. The foundation isn't there. A more mature, principle-centered approach relies on understanding, love, nurture, allowing free choice. Children naturally want to share once they feel a true sense of possession and security first.
Wow. Okay, this lens really reframes a lot of common problems. You can see how they might stem from relying on the personality ethic.
Definitely. Take blame and victimism. Society seems addicted to blaming, if only my boss wasn't like that, or if only circumstances were different.
It gives temporary relief, maybe.
Maybe, but it chains you to the problem. The principle-centered solution. Humility to accept responsibility for your part, and the courage to take initiative within your sphere of influence.
Or that constant feeling of being overwhelmed, the lack of life balance. We're so busy running around.
Often in the thick of thin things, as Covey puts it, we sacrifice health, family integrity for the urgent demands of work. Efficiency isn't the answer if you're efficiently doing the wrong things.
True balance comes from clarifying your highest priorities based on principles and living with integrity towards them.
Right. Or the heartbreaking scenario of achieving huge career success, but finding your personal and family life has disintegrated.
The personality ethic offers no real fix for that, does it? Just more techniques, maybe?
Pretty much. A principle-centered approach demands defining what's truly important, the end in mind, and then managing yourself accordingly, putting those crucial relationships first.
This all really points to the failure of what Covey termed the outside-in paradigm.
Exactly. The idea that lasting happiness and success come from changing external circumstances or other people.
It just doesn't work long-term.
No. It leads to feeling victimized, immobilized, constantly focused on the weaknesses of others or the flaws in the environment. It applies to marriages, workplaces, everywhere.
Changing that perspective, shifting to an inside-out approach, that sounds hard.
It is hard. It requires sacrificing what you might want now, the quick fix, the immediate gratification for what you want ultimately. Happiness, Covey argues, is often the fruit of that sacrifice, the result of aligning your actions with deeper principles over fleeting desires. #tag 4, the maturity continuum and the 7 habits framework.
Okay, so these foundational ideas, paradigms, principles, inside out, they lead us to the overall structure of the 7 habits themselves.
Yeah.
They aren't just a random list, are they?
Not at all. Covey presents them as an incremental, sequential, and highly integrated approach to effectiveness. They guide us progressively along what he calls the maturity continuum.
The maturity continuum? What are the stages?
We start at dependence. This is the paradigm of you. You take care of me, you come through for me, you didn't come through, I blame you for the results. Common for infants, but also persists emotionally or intellectually in adults.
Okay, relying on others. Then what?
Then we move towards independence. This is the paradigm of I. I can do it. I am responsible. I am self-reliant. I can choose. It's about self-mastery, acting rather than being acted upon.
That sounds like a really worthy goal in itself, freeing.
It absolutely is. Independence is a major achievement. But, and this is crucial, Covey argues it's not the ultimate goal for effectiveness in our lives, which are inherently interdependent.
So what's beyond independence?
Interdependence. This is the paradigm of we. We can do it. We can cooperate. We can combine our talents and abilities to create something greater together. It's realizing that working together accomplishes far more.
But here's the catch you mentioned earlier.
Right. Interdependence is a choice that only independent people can make. Dependent people lack the character, the self-mastery to truly choose interdependence. They might try to cooperate, but it often comes from a place of need or manipulation, not strength.
Okay, that makes sense. And this continuum explains the order of the habits.
Perfectly. Habits 1, 2, and 3. Be proactive, begin with the end in mind, and put first things first. These deal with private victories.
Self-mastery, moving from dependence to independence.
Exactly. They're the essence of character growth, Covey says. And they must precede public victories because it's fundamentally an inside-out process. You can't build effective relationships with others if you haven't mastered yourself.
So habits 4, 5, and 6.
Think win-win. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, and synergize these focus on public victories. They are about effective interaction in an interdependent reality.
Once you've achieved independence, you can choose interdependence.
Exactly. And finally, habit 7, sharpen the saw, is the habit of renewal. It circles back and embodies all the other habits. It creates this continuous improvement that leads to an upward spiral of growth and keeps everything else working.
Maintaining the engine, so to speak.
Precisely. And at the heart of maintaining effectiveness, Covey introduces another critical concept, the PPC balance.
Right, you mentioned this briefly. P is production.
The results you want. The golden eggs.
And PC is production capability.
The asset or the ability that produces those results. The goose that lays the golden eggs.
Ah, the famous Aesop's fable.
It illustrates it perfectly. The farmer gets greedy, focuses only on getting more eggs right now, kills the goose, PC, and ends up with nothing.
So neglecting the PC always destroys the P in the long run.
Always. This balance is the very essence of effectiveness.
How does this apply beyond fables?
Well, think about physical assets.
Yeah.
Like a lawnmower. If you just keep using it, P, without ever doing maintenance like sharpening the blade or changing neglecting PC, eventually it breaks down and produces nothing.
Makes sense.
He argues it's even more crucial for human assets because people control the physical and financial ones. Think about a marriage. If partners focus solely on getting the golden eggs, the benefits, the good feelings, having their needs met, P, without consistently investing in the relationship itself through PC work.
Like kindness, consideration, listening, keeping commitments.
Exactly. Then the goose, the relationship itself, the trust, the connection, gets sick and eventually dies.
That's a powerful way to put it.
He shared a personal story about taking his daughter to see Star Wars, even though he wasn't interested.
Why?
He realized his own preference not to go, a short-term P, was less important than building the relationship with her, long-term PC. By going and genuinely listening to her explain Jedi philosophy, he made a huge deposit in their relationship account. He became her student.
So it's about prioritizing the long-term health of the asset.
Yes, and the reverse happens too. He mentioned a restaurant known for fantastic clam chowder, P.
Yeah.
They decided to increase profits by watering it down slightly, focusing on short-term P, maximizing profit per bowl, while neglecting the PC, which was customer trust and loyalty based on quality.
What happened?
Profits shot up temporarily, but then plummeted as customers felt betrayed and stopped coming. They killed their customer loyalty goose.
Wow. So this PPC balance applies everywhere.
Everywhere, even to how you treat employees. Covey suggests treating employees as you'd want them to treat your best customers, like volunteers.
Volunteers. Because you can buy a person's hand, their time, but you can't buy their heart, their mind, their loyalty, their creativity. That's volunteered. PC work with employees means recognizing that and treating them in a way that inspires them to volunteer their best efforts.
So maintaining this PPC balance, it sounds like the core definition of being truly effective.
It really is. It often involves difficult judgment calls, balancing short-term needs with long-term health, but it's absolutely critical for sustained success in any area of life.
Okay, let's dive into the habits themselves, starting with the very first one, the foundation. Be proactive.
And this means so much more than just taking initiative, although that's part of it.
What's the core meaning then?
At its heart, proactivity means we are responsible for our own lives. Our behavior is a function of our decisions, not our conditions.
We have the initiative and the responsibility to make things happen. We subordinate feelings to values.
Exactly. Covey emphasizes the word responsibility, our ability to choose our response.
So proactive people don't blame circumstances, conditions, or their upbringing.
Right. Their behavior is a product of their own conscious choice based on their values, not just a reaction to external stimuli or how they happen to feel in the moment.
But that feels counterintuitive sometimes. Don't our circumstances and conditioning affect us deeply?
Of course they affect us. The proactive approach doesn't deny that, but it asserts that between the stimulus, what happens to us and our response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power and freedom to choose our response.
The space between stimulus and response.
And this is where Viktor Frankl's story becomes so incredibly powerful.
The psychiatrist who survived the Nazi death camps.
Yes.
Yeah.
He endured horrors most of us can't even imagine: torture, starvation, the loss of his entire family, constant threat of death.
Unthinkable.
Yet in that environment, he discovered what he called the last of the human freedoms, the freedom to choose his response. His captors could control his environment, his body, everything external, but they could not take away his freedom to decide how all of this would affect him internally. He realized he was a self-aware being who could look at his own involvement.
That space between stimulus and response. He found it even there.
He found it there. And Covey visualizes this space as being enabled by our unique human endowments: self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will.
Unlike animals who are programmed by instinct or training.
Humans can examine their own programming and write new programs. If we just live based on our conditioning or feelings, we're acting like animals, limiting our potential. Frankl showed that even the most difficult experiences can become crucibles that forge our character, developing internal powers to handle future challenges and inspire others.
How does this show up in everyday life, maybe in our language?
Our language is incredibly revealing of whether we're operating from a reactive or proactive paradigm. Reactive language is full of phrases like, "There's nothing I can do," "That's just the way I am, he makes me so mad, they won't allow that," "I have to do this," "I can't," "if only."
It kind of absolves responsibility, doesn't it? Puts the control outside yourself.
Precisely. Proactive language, on the other hand, sounds like, "Let's look at our alternatives. I can choose a different approach. I control my own feelings. I can create an effective presentation. I will choose an appropriate response. I choose. I prefer. I will."
It reflects ownership and choice.
It's about facing reality, yes, but also facing the reality that we always have the power to choose a positive response, even if it's just choosing our attitude.
This connects to another key model in Habit 1, the circle of concern versus the circle of influence.
Yes, a very practical tool. Our circle of concern includes all the things we care about: global issues, national debt, other people's behavior, things we have essentially no direct control over. Reactive people tend to focus their energy here. They worry, complain, blame, accuse, and the result: their feelings of victimization increase, and paradoxically, their actual circle of influence shrinks.
Because they're wasting energy on things they can't change.
Exactly. Covey mentions how he and his wife initially focused on their son's weaknesses and how others treated him, all in the circle of concern, and felt helpless.
So the alternative is?
Focusing on the circle of influence. This contains the things we can do something about: our choices, our attitudes, our skills, how we treat others, the problems we can directly solve.
And a proactive focus here.
It's positive. It's enlarging. When you work on the things you can't control, your competence grows, your confidence grows, and your actual circle of influence increases.
Like the Coveys focusing on their own paradigms regarding their son, changing themselves.
That was the key. By working within their circle of influence, they created positive energy that eventually influenced their son in a way that worrying about him never could.
It reminds me of that story of Joseph you mentioned earlier. In prison, he focused on his inner circle, on being, and eventually influenced his entire circumstances.
A perfect example. Influencing circumstances often comes indirectly by working on what we are, on the things within our control.
So if you're having marriage problems, focusing on your spouse's faults, circle of concern, is reactive and ineffective.
Right. The proactive approach is to focus on yourself, circle of influence, being a better partner, being a source of unconditional love, working on your own character flaws. That's the most powerful way to positively influence the situation.
Even happiness itself.
Is a proactive choice. Even when things are genuinely outside our control, like the weather, we can choose our internal response. We can carry our own physical or social weather, as Covey puts it.
Okay, but what about consequences? Can we choose those too?
That's a crucial point. We are free to choose our actions, but we are not free to choose the consequences of those actions.
Consequences are governed by natural law. They're outside our choice.
Yes, they are often in the circle of concern. If you step in front of a speeding train, your choice of action, the consequences are pretty much fixed by natural law. If you're dishonest in business, there are inevitable consequences to your character and trustworthiness, whether you get caught or not.
It's like Covey says, when we pick up one end of the stick, we pick up the other.
Exactly. Choosing an action means choosing its attendant consequence.
What about mistakes? We all make them.
Proactive people acknowledge them instantly, correct them, and learn from them. It's often not the mistake itself, but our response to the mistake, covering it up, blaming others, wallowing in guilt that hurts us most. Admitting and correcting quickly is empowering.
So being proactive isn't about being perfect, but about taking responsibility for our choices, our responses, and even our mistakes.
Precisely. And the essence of developing this proactivity, this effectiveness, lies in our ability to make and keep commitments, especially to ourselves. Knowledge, skill, desire, these are all within our circle of influence.
We don't need some huge crisis like Frankel faced to practice this.
Not at all. Proactivity is developed in the small choices of everyday life. How we handle traffic jams, how we respond to a difficult customer or a child's tantrum, how we view problems, where we focus our energy, the language we use.
Covey had a great line. If you start to think the problem is out there, stop yourself. That thought is the problem.
Powerful, isn't it? It brings the focus right back to your circle of influence.
He suggests a 30-day test.
Yeah, a practical challenge. For 30 days, consciously work only in your circle of influence. Identify a problem in your life, determine if it's under your direct control, indirect control, influence, or no control. Then take one proactive step, however small, within your circle of influence to address it. Observe what happens.
Sounds like a potent exercise.
It can be transformative. And finally, Covey applies proactivity to the concept of love itself.
Yes, the seminar participant who said he didn't feel love for his wife anymore.
Right. The feeling wasn't there, and Covey's response was startlingly direct. Love her. Love as a verb, not just a feeling. Love the feeling is a fruit of love the verb, he explained. The actions of love, serving, sacrificing, listening, empathizing, appreciating, affirming, those are choices within our control.
So reactive people are driven by feelings. If the feeling's gone, they think the love is gone.
Exactly. The Hollywood script often portrays love as something that just happens to us, making us victims of our feelings. But Covey argues that's an abdication of responsibility. Proactive people make love a verb, an action, a choice. The feeling often follows the action.
Okay, so once we embrace proactivity, understanding we have the power to choose what's next, that brings us to habit 2. Begin with the end in mind.
Exactly. If habit 1 says you are the programmer, habit 2 is about writing the program.
And Covey introduces this with a really striking exercise, doesn't he? The funeral visualization.
Yes, it's quite profound. He asks you to imagine, vividly, attending your own funeral 3 years from now.
Yeah.
Picture the setting, the people, yourself in the casket.
A bit morbid, maybe.
It can feel that way initially, but the purpose is incredibly powerful. He asks you to listen to what 4 speakers might say. A family member, a friend, someone from work, and someone from a community organization.
What would you want them to say about you? About your character, your contributions, your relationships?
Precisely. This deep visualization exercise forces you into contact with your most fundamental values, your inner guidance system. It cuts through the superficial stuff and makes you ask, what really matters to me? What do I want my life to be about?
So, begin with the end in mind. Literally means starting today with the image, picture, or paradigm of the end of your life as your frame of reference.
Yes. Knowing where you're going ultimately helps you understand where you are now and ensures that the steps you take are always in the right direction.
It helps avoid what you call the activity trap.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of life, climbing the ladder of success, focusing on efficiency.
Only to get to the top and realize the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall.
Exactly. All that effort, all those achievements can feel empty if they come at the expense of things you later realize were far more important. Your health, your family, your integrity.
So your definition of success needs to come from within, from that deep reflection on your ultimate values, not just from chasing what society deems important, like fame or money.
That's the core idea. And this principle is based on another fundamental concept. All things are created twice.
Created twice. How so?
There's always a mental or first creation and then a physical or second creation. Think about building a house.
Okay.
First, you create it in meticulous detail in your mind, then on blueprints. That's the first creation. Only after that complete mental creation do you start the physical work, the second creation, hammering the first nail.
Ah, I see. Planning a trip, designing clothes, writing a speech. They all have a mental creation first.
Exactly. Now, the key is, if we don't consciously take control of our own first creation, especially for our lives, then we default to scripts written by others. Precisely. We end up living out scripts handed to us by our family, our peers, societal pressures, our past habits. And these scripts often come from our vulnerabilities, our need for acceptance, not from our deepest principles.
So habit 2 is about consciously becoming your own first creator.
Yes. Using those unique human endowments, self-awareness, imagination, conscience, to examine those default scripts and proactively write your own, one that aligns with your chosen values and principles. Habit 1 says, you are the creator. Habit 2 is the first creation.
This leads to another critical distinction Covey makes: leadership versus management.
A vital one. Habit 2 is all about leadership. It's the first creation. It's asking, what are the things I want to accomplish? What is the right direction? Am I in the right jungle?
And management.
That comes later, primarily in habit 3. Management is the second creation. It's about efficiency, doing things right. How can I best accomplish these things? Sharpening the machete.
But leadership has to come first.
Absolutely. Covey uses that wonderful analogy. Imagine managers in a jungle, efficiently directing workers, sharpening machetes, clearing undergrowth, making progress.
Sounds productive.
It looks productive, but the leader is the one who climbs the tallest tree, surveys the situation, and yells, "Wrong jungle!"
And the busy, efficient managers below shout back, "Shut up, we're making progress."
Exactly. In our rapidly changing world, effective leadership is more critical than ever. Survival, let alone success, depends not just on how much effort we expend, but on whether that effort is channeled in the right direction.
You can be incredibly efficient at doing the wrong things.
Tragically common. This applies personally, too. Parents can get trapped in a management paradigm, rules, controls, efficiency, instead of leadership providing direction, purpose, family feeling. We manage our lives efficiently without first clarifying our values.
So taking charge of that first creation involves rescripting, rewriting those ineffective scripts we were handed.
Yes. Using self-awareness to recognize the scripts, imagination to envision new possibilities, and conscience to align them with correct principles. It's paradigm shifting at a deep level.
Like Anwar Sadat, who you mentioned, rescripting his deeply ingrained hatred for Israel.
A powerful example. He worked in his circle of influence, changing his own paradigm first, which led to actions that affected millions.
And personally, it means digging deep to uncover our most fundamental values, living out of imagination, not just reacting based on past memories, connecting to our potential, not our limitations.
And the most effective way Covey found to do this, to take responsibility for that first creation, is to develop a personal mission statement.
A personal constitution, he called it.
Yes, something that clearly defines who you want to be, character, and what you want to do, contributions and achievements, based on your deepest values and principles.
Like a national constitution, it's meant to be relatively stable, fundamentally changeless.
Ideally, yes, because it's based on timeless principles. It provides the vision and values to direct your life, setting the foundation for both long and short-term goals. It becomes the standard against which you measure everything else you do, how you spend your time, your energy, your talents.
It gives you a clear end in mind to refer back to constantly.
Exactly. Viktor Frankl developed logotherapy based on the idea that much psychological illness stems from a sense of meaninglessness. Helping people detect their unique meaning or mission in life is key. Having that sense of mission is the essence of personal leadership, the core of habit 2.
So how do you actually create one? Where do you start?
It requires identifying the very center of your circle of influence, your most basic paradigms, what your life is fundamentally centered on.
Because that center is the source of our security, guidance, wisdom, and power.
Precisely. And Covey points out that many common centers are inherently unstable.
Like being spouse-centered.
Yes. Your security comes from your spouse's approval, making you vulnerable to their moods, leading to conditional love. Or family-centered, making you dependent on tradition or reputation.
Money-centered, possession-centered, pleasure-centered.
Friend-centered, enemy-centered, where your life revolves around reacting to someone else. Even church-centered, if it becomes about image rather than principles.
The problem with all these fluctuating centers.
They lead to a roller coaster life. No consistent direction, wisdom, or power. Your sense of self is constantly buffeted by external changes.
So the ideal center is
the principle-centered paradigm, centering your life on timeless, unchanging principles, fairness, integrity, dignity, service, growth, creates a solid foundation.
it puts all those other centers, spouse, family, work, into perspective, making them important aspects of life, but not the center.
Exactly. Principles don't react to anything. They don't get mad. They don't change based on circumstances. Centering on them provides security independent of conditions, guidance from an internal compass, wisdom that sees long-term consequences, and proactive power based on self-awareness and values.
Okay, so identifying principles is key. How do we actually write the mission statement? Engage the creative side.
Yes, tapping into the right brain is crucial. Imagination and conscience help us re-script. Visualization techniques are powerful.
Like actually writing out that eulogy from the funeral exercise.
Yes, or visualizing future milestones, anniversaries, retirement, capturing the desired state, and using affirmations.
Those I am statements.
Well, more like present tense statements describing the desired state as if it's already true. Covey suggests 5 ingredients for effective affirmations: personal, positive, present tense, visual, and emotional.
Can you give an example?
It is deeply satisfying, emotional, that I, personal, respond, present tense, with wisdom, love, firmness, and self-control, positive, when my children misbehave. Then you visualize yourself doing that.
Like Covey's son Sean, visualizing successful football plays, even visualizing feeling relaxed under pressure.
Exactly. Peak performers in sports and business are often visualizers. They create an internal comfort zone by mentally rehearsing success based on principles.
So these techniques work best when they flow from a deeply considered, principle-centered mission.
Absolutely. They need that foundation.
And identifying your different life roles helps bring the mission statement to life.
Very much so. Thinking about your mission in terms of key roles, husband, father, manager, friend, community member, provides balance and helps ensure no single role dominates everything else. You can then set specific long-term goals within each role, aligned with your overall mission and principles.
It sounds like it applies to families and organizations, too.
Definitely. A family mission statement, created collaboratively, becomes the family's constitution, its shared vision and values.
The process of creating it is key, getting everyone involved.
Crucial. No involvement, no commitment, Covey stresses. It builds communication, respect, and family PC. It provides a framework for making decisions, especially during crises.
And for organizations.
Same principle. He cites IBM's long-standing belief system as providing shared values. And a hotel that achieved amazing service because its mission statement wasn't just written by execs, but by everyone: housekeepers, clerks, wait staff.
And it became the actual criterion for every decision.
Yeah.
Hiring, training, everything.
That collective involvement creates genuine buy-in and commitment. People are far more committed to determinations they had a hand in creating.
Okay, so habit 1 is you're the creator. Habit 2 is the first. Mental creation, defining the program based on principles and your end in mind. Now we get to habit 3. Put first things first.
This is the second creation, the physical creation. It's the practical fulfillment of habits 1 and 2.
It's where the rubber meets the road. Daily execution.
Exactly. It's the management of yourself, your time, your energy, your focus to actually live out the vision and values you defined in habit 2. It's the breaking down, the sequencing, the specific application, the time-bound left brain aspect of effective self-government.
Covey had that great maxim, manage from the left, lead from the right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Leadership, right brain habit 2, decides what the first things are. Management, left brain habit 3, puts those first things first, day by day, week by week.
What's the core element needed to actually do this?
Independent will. Exercising that endowment we talked about in Habit 1. And it manifests primarily as integrity and discipline.
Integrity meaning.
More than just honesty, it's the value we place on ourselves, our ability to make and keep commitments to ourselves, to walk our talk. It's the essence of proactive growth.
And discipline. Not just forcing yourself.
No, discipline in this context comes from within. It's being a disciple, a follower of your own deep values, your philosophy, your purpose, your mission statement. It's subordinating feelings, impulses, and moods to those higher values.
Like that quote about successful people.
E.M. Gray's common denominator of success. Yes, successful people have the habit of doing the things failures don't like to do.
Not because they like doing them necessarily.
Because their dislike is subordinated to the strength of their purpose. Whether it's exercise, making difficult calls, studying, listening, they do it because it aligns with their chosen values and goals.
This also implies having the strength to say no.
Crucial. You have to say no to unimportant things, even good things sometimes. To have the space to say yes to your most important priorities, your first things.
The enemy of the best is often the good.
Exactly. If you don't proactively decide what your highest priorities are, based on Habit 2, everything else will seem urgent and important. You'll be reacting constantly.
So having a clear, burning yes inside your mission, your values, makes it easier to say no politely and without apology to things that don't align.
Much easier. It provides the context for your choices.
Now, Habit 3 is often associated with time management. How does Covey approach that?
He reviews the evolution of time management, from simple notes and checklists, first generation, to calendars and appointment books, second, to prioritization and daily planning, third.
Third generation sounds pretty good, efficient, goal-oriented.
It is efficient, but Covey found limitations. It can still lead to overscheduling, burnout, feeling controlled by the schedule, and often neglects important non-work roles and relationships because it lacks a broader context.
So what's the fourth generation approach he advocates?
It centers on the Quadrant 2 focus. This builds on the third generation, but shifts the paradigm. It uses a matrix with axes for urgency and importance.
Right. Quadrant first is urgent and important, crises, deadlines. Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important, interruptions, some meetings. Quadrant 3 is not urgent and not important, time wasters.
And Quadrant 2 is the sweet spot, important but not urgent.
What kinds of activities fall there?
Things like prevention, building relationships, PC work, identifying new opportunities, planning, recreation, personal development, sharpening the saw. These are the things that make a huge difference long term, but because they aren't urgent, they often get squeezed out.
We live in Quadrant 1, reacting to crises, and escape to Quadrant 4, but neglect Quadrant 2.
That's the common trap. Effective people minimize time in 3rd and 4 and spend significant time in Quadrant 2, which actually shrinks Quadrant I over time because you're preventing problems and building capacity.
So the focus isn't just daily planning, but organizing your life around Quadrant 2 activities.
Yes, and the best way to do that, Covey argues, is on a weekly basis.
Weekly? Why weekly?
A week provides better balance and context than a single day. It allows you to schedule time for your various roles, parent, spouse, manager, individual, and proactively block out time for those crucial Quadrant 2 activities before the week begins and fills up with Quadrant I demands.
It links back to Habit 2, identifying roles and goals from your mission statement.
Precisely. The process is 1. Identify roles. 2. Select goals for the week in each role, often Quadrant 2 goals. 3. Schedule time to achieve those goals. 4. Adapt daily as needed.
The key principle being, the key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities.
That's the essence of Quadrant 2 self-management. You schedule the big rocks first, your important Quadrant 2 activities, and let the gravel fill in around them.
Give some examples of applying this.
Okay. Exercise. Scheduling 3 to 5 hours a week, Quadrant 2, prevents future health crises, Quadrant 1. Professional development. Instead of procrastinating on reading journals, systematize it. Quadrant 2, relationship building. Proactively scheduling time with key people, not just reacting when there's a problem.
It requires discipline to protect that Quadrant 2 time.
It does, and it requires remembering the maxim. Efficiency with things, effectiveness with people. You can't be efficient with deep relationship building or strategic thinking. Those require focused Quadrant 2 time.
A huge part of freeing up time for Quadrant 2 involves delegation, doesn't it?
Absolutely, especially for managers. Covey distinguishes between being a producer, doing the work yourself, and being a manager, getting results through others. Effective management requires effective delegation.
And he contrasts two types, Go for delegation and stewardship delegation.
Right. Go for delegation is micromanaging, go for this, go for that, do it this way, tell me when it's done. It supervises methods, it's inefficient, and stifles growth and initiative.
Okay, so what's stewardship delegation?
This is the quadrant 2 approach. It focuses on results, not methods. It gives people a choice of method and makes them responsible for the outcome. It takes more time up front to set up, but it leverages their full capacities, self-awareness, imagination, conscience, free will.
How does it work? What needs to be clear?
5 things need mutual understanding and commitment up front.
1.
Desired results. A clear mutual understanding of what needs to be accomplished, the end goal, not how.
2.
Guidelines. Any parameters or principles they need to operate within. Keep these minimal to avoid controlling methods. Point out potential pitfalls, but let them figure it out. 3.
Resources. Identify the human, financial, technical, or organizational support available.
4.
Accountability. Set the standards of performance and specific times for reporting back. How will results be evaluated?
And 5.
Consequences. Specify what will happen, good and bad, as a result of the evaluation. Financial rewards, psychic rewards like recognition, new assignments, natural consequences related to the task.
This sounds much more empowering.
It's incredibly empowering. Covey uses the example of teaching his 7-year-old son, Stephen, to care for the yard.
Ah, yes, the green and clean yard.
He trained him thoroughly on the result, green and clean, showing him examples. Defined the roles, Stephen was the boss, Dad was the helper, set accountability, weekly walkarounds, and consequences. Neighbor kid would get the job if Stephen didn't do it.
What happened initially?
Stephen did nothing for days. Covey felt frustrated, embarrassed. His impulse was to revert to go for delegation, yelling, supervising methods.
But he didn't. He used habit 1. He paused, controlled his reaction, remembered the agreement, and stuck to the stewardship role. When Stephen finally realized the consequence was real, he took responsibility. Covey offered help, but Stephen was the boss.
And the result?
Stephen learned self-management, internal discipline. The process built his character, PC, and strengthened their relationship, even while getting the yard done, P.
This approach takes trust and patience.
A lot of both. But the payoff is huge. It releases tremendous human potential, creates synergy, builds PC. People start evaluating themselves based on the agreed criteria. Managers become helpers, first assistants, dramatically increasing their span of control.
And finally, aligning the reward systems is critical.
Absolutely. You get what you reward. If the formal or informal reward system rewards win-lose behavior or short-term results at the expense of PC, your win-win or quadrant 2 efforts will be undermined. Consequences should flow naturally and logically from the agreed-upon results and guidelines.
Okay, so we've covered the private victories habits 1, 2, and 3, moving from dependence to independence, building character and self-mastery. Now we move into the public victories habits 4, 5, and 6, which are about interdependence.
Exactly. And as we enter the realm of interdependence, Covey points out that while it brings incredible possibilities, it can also bring intense, acute pain when problems arise, especially in relationships.
Conflict, misunderstandings, broken trust.
Right. And our tendency, often influenced by personality ethic, is to reach for quick fixes, those social band-aids, to deal with the acute pain.
But this just masks the deeper chronic problems, issues with character, habits 1, 2, 3, or maybe a flawed vision of the relationship.
Precisely. And this is where Covey introduces one of his most powerful metaphors for interdependent relationships. The emotional bank account, EBA.
EBA. Explain that.
Think of it like a financial bank account, but it represents the amount of trust that's been built up in a relationship. It's the feeling of safety you have with another person.
So you make deposits and withdrawals.
Exactly. Deposits are made through things like courtesy, kindness, honesty, keeping promises, being loyal, apologizing sincerely, seeking to understand. These build a reserve of trust.
And when the EBA is high?
Communication is easy, instant, effective. You can make mistakes, and people give you the benefit of that because there's a high trust level.
And withdrawals.
Discourtesy, disrespect, cutting people off, overreacting, ignoring them, betraying trust, manipulating, making threats. These deplete the account.
And if the balance is low or overdrawn?
Then you're walking on minefields. Communication becomes guarded, defensive, tense. You have to measure every word. Politicking and backbiting thrive. Sadly, many organizations, families, and marriages operate with chronically overdrawn accounts.
It requires constant attention, doesn't it? Especially in long-term relationships.
Absolutely. Covey says our most constant relationships require the most constant deposits because old deposits evaporate due to ongoing expectations. This is especially true with teenagers, he notes.
Making deposits,
Right.
like clarifying expectations up front.
That's a huge one. So many problems stem from ambiguous or violated expectations. We assume things are clear, the other person assumes something else, trust gets eroded. Taking the time and courage to make expectations explicit up front is a massive deposit.
And personal integrity, keeping promises, walking your talk, that's fundamental.
The foundation. It goes beyond just telling the truth, honesty, to conforming reality to our words, keeping promises. And a key aspect is being loyal to those who aren't present.
Defending the absent.
Yes, if you criticize people behind their backs, those present will infer you do the same to them. It destroys trust. Integrity means treating everyone by the same set of principles.
Sincere apologies are also deposits.
Huge deposits when they come from the heart. It takes character strength and security to apologize quickly and sincerely. People with low internal security often avoid it, fearing vulnerability or feeling justified. Repeated insincere apologies become withdrawals.
People forgive mistakes of the mind, Covey says, but not of the heart, bad intentions, prideful cover-ups.
Right. And maybe the most powerful deposit relates to unconditional love.
Unconditional love.
Yeah.
How does that work as a deposit?
It affirms the other person's intrinsic worth, separate from their behavior. It encourages them to live by primary laws like cooperation and integrity by believing in their potential. It gives them the freedom to act based on their own inner imperatives, rather than reacting defensively.
Whereas conditional love, I'll love you if, is a withdrawal.
A huge withdrawal. It attaches strings, puts the other person in a reactive, defensive posture, often leading to rebellion, which Covey calls a knot of the heart. When parents offer unconditional love, children are freed from the need to fight for their individuality and can choose to align with principles themselves.
So viewing relationship problems, P problems, as opportunities to build the relationship PC opportunities by making deposits is key.
Exactly. Now, with that foundation of trust, or at least the intention to build it, we can approach habit 4 itself. Think win-win.
Win-win. What's the core idea?
It's a frame of mind and heart that constantly seeks mutual benefit in all human interactions. It's believing there's a third alternative, not just my way or your way, but a better way.
So solutions are mutually beneficial and satisfying. Everyone feels good about the decision and committed to the action plan.
That's the goal. Win-win sees life as a cooperative arena, not a competitive one. It rejects the dichotomous, either thinking that often comes from power dynamics and positional bargaining.
This sounds like it requires a particular mindset.
It flows from what Covey calls the abundance mentality.
Abundance mentality.
It's the paradigm that there is plenty out there and enough to spare for everybody. It comes from a deep inner sense of personal worth and security built through habits 1, 2, 3. People with this mentality find it easy to share prestige, recognition, profits, decision-making. It opens up possibilities and creativity.
And the opposite.
The scarcity mentality, the paradigm that life is a zero-sum game. If someone else gets something, that means less for me. People with this mentality often harbor secret hopes for others' misfortune, are constantly comparing and competing, feel threatened by differences, and surround themselves with guess people.
Our society often seems to reinforce win-lose thinking, doesn't it?
Heavily. Think about the academic world with grading on a curve. Your A means someone else gets a C. Or competitive sports where winning explicitly means beating someone else. Or the legal system, which is inherently adversarial.
It takes conscious effort to adopt a win-win paradigm in that environment.
It really does. Now, there are other paradigms besides win-win and win-lose. There's lose-win, being a doormat, lose-lose, conflict getting out of hand, revenge, and just win, thinking only of yourself, leaving others to look out for themselves.
But win-win is the only truly sustainable and effective approach for interdependence.
Covey argues it is, and he adds a crucial fifth option, win-win or no deal.
No deal. What does that mean?
It means if you can't reach a solution that's truly synergistic, truly beneficial to both parties, you agree to disagree agreeably. No deal.
Why is that important?
Because it's better to preserve the relationship, PC, for future win-win opportunities, than to push for a deal now that leaves one or both parties feeling bad, a win-lose or lose-win compromise. It requires courage, especially when walking away seems costly short-term.
Like that software CEO walking away from an $84,000 contract.
Yes, because the new bank president's team wasn't truly committed. Low EBA, not win-win. Walking away preserved his integrity and the potential relationship. 3 months later, the bank came back, fully committed, and signed a $240,000 contract. No deal protected the possibility of a better win-win later.
Achieving win-win seems to require balancing two key traits:
Courage and consideration. Maturity, Covey says, is the balance between the two. Courage is the willingness to speak your convictions, pursue your goals. Consideration is the willingness to listen empathetically to others' viewpoints and desires.
What happens if they're out of balance?
High courage but low consideration leads to win-lose. You're strong, maybe, but ego-driven, steamrolling others. High consideration but low courage leads to lose-win. You're nice, but you subordinate your own needs and get walked over.
So the sweet spot is high courage and high consideration.
Yes. That allows you to be both tough and nice, to listen empathically and courageously confront when necessary, always aiming for that synergistic third alternative.
And this win-win approach transforms management, especially performance agreements.
Hugely. It shifts the focus from supervising methods to agreeing on results, releasing potential. Like the stewardship delegation we discussed.
People evaluate themselves based on criteria they helped create.
Exactly. Like the 7-year-old with the yard or university students defining their own goals within the teacher's requirements. It increases empowerment and accountability. Bosses become helpers, increasing their span of control. Consequences become natural results, not punishments.
But it all has to be supported by the system, the reward.
Absolutely critical. If the system rewards win-lose competition, like a sales contest where only one person wins, talking win-win is just hypocrisy. You get what you reward.
So win-win isn't just a technique.
No, it's a total paradigm of human interaction. It's rooted in character, integrity, maturity, abundance mentality, requires high-trust relationships, high EBA, is structured through effective agreements, and needs supportive systems. And it's achieved through the process of habits 5 and 6.
Okay, that leads us perfectly into habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. This feels like the communication habit that makes win-win possible.
It absolutely is. It's the principle of empathic communication. And Covey starts with another brilliant analogy, the optometrist analogy.
Right. You go in complaining about your vision.
And the optometrist, without any examination, just whips off his own glasses and says, "Here, try these. They've worked perfectly for me for years."
You try them on, and of course, they make your vision worse.
Right. And when you complain, he says, "Well, try harder. Think positively." Or maybe blames you for not appreciating his help.
It's absurd. You'd never trust that optometrist.
Never. Prescribing before diagnosing is malpractice in medicine. Yet Covey points out, how often do we do exactly this in our communication?
We jump in with advice, solutions, our own perspective, before we've even taken the time to deeply understand the other person's problem or point of view.
We prescribe based on our own glasses. And Covey's core point here is, you cannot achieve influence, you cannot build trust, you cannot reach win-win solutions if you haven't first genuinely understood the other person. Influence requires being influenced.
So the first part of the habit is crucial. Seek first to understand. How do we do that effectively?
Through empathic listening. And this requires a major paradigm shift for most people.
Because most people listen with the intent to
Reply, not to understand. While the other person is talking, we're busy preparing our response, filtering everything through our own experiences, our own autobiography. We're evaluating, agreeing, disagreeing, probing, advising, interpreting, all from our own frame of reference.
What does true empathic listening look like then?
It means listening with the sole intent to understand, to get inside the other person's frame of reference, to see the world the way they see it, to understand their paradigm, to understand how they feel.
Not just listening to their words, but the meaning and feeling behind them.
Exactly. It's receiving the deep communication, their thoughts, their motives, their interpretations, their emotions. This is the key to making those EBA deposits. Because remember, nothing you do is a deposit unless the other person perceives it as such. Understanding them deeply is the biggest deposit you can make.
Covey identifies those common pitfalls, the autobiographical responses.
Yes, the 4 typical ways we listen from our own perspective.
Evaluate. Agreeing or disagreeing before understanding.
Probe. Asking questions but from our own agenda or curiosity.
Advise. Giving counsel based on our own experience, if I were you.
Interpret. Trying to figure people out, explaining their motives based on our psychology.
And these prevent real understanding.
They totally short-circuit it. He gives that powerful father-son dialogue example.
My son says, "School is for the birds."
Right. He's expressing frustration, maybe feeling overwhelmed, wanting attention. The father, meaning well, jumps in with autobiographical responses. What's the matter? Probing. You just need to apply yourself. Advising. When I was your age, evaluating from his experience, don't you realize the sacrifices? Interpreting guilt tripping.
And the son just shuts down, feels completely unheard, misunderstood.
Exactly. The father, though well-intentioned, failed to diagnose before prescribing.
So what does empathic listening sound like? What skills are involved?
Covey describes a progression. The simplest level is mimicking content, just repeating their words. Better is rephrasing the content in your own words. Even better is reflecting the feeling you hear behind the words.
But the most effective level?
It's combining the last two. Rephrasing the content and reflecting the feeling. So for the son who says, "School is for the birds," instead of probing or advising, the father might say,
You sound really frustrated. You feel like school just isn't doing anything for you right now.
"Perfect. What happens then?" The son feels understood, validated, he feels safe. The psychological air rushes in, and he can start to open up more, explore his own feelings, and eventually, maybe even become open to his father's perspective or advice.
But the desire to understand has to be sincere, right? It can't just be a technique.
Absolutely crucial. If you use these skills manipulatively, people will feel it, and it becomes a huge withdrawal. It helps to genuinely state your intent. Look, I really want to understand where you're coming from. Help me see it. That sincerity itself is a deposit.
This principle, diagnose before you prescribe it, applies everywhere, doesn't it?
It's fundamental to all true professions. Doctors diagnose before prescribing. Lawyers gather facts before building a case. Salespeople understand needs before selling products. Teachers assess understanding before teaching. Parents need to understand before judging or advising. Good judgment depends on understanding. Judging first prevents full understanding.
Okay, so that's the first crucial part. Seek first to understand, then comes the second part. Then seek to be understood.
Yes. This is the courage side of the equation, balancing the consideration of empathic listening. Both are essential for win-win.
How do we effectively seek to be understood once we've truly understood the other person?
Covey draws on the ancient Greek philosophy of persuasion: ethos, pathos, and logos.
Ethos being?
Your personal credibility, your trustworthiness, your integrity, the faith people have in your character. Basically, the EBA you've built.
Those.
The empathic side, the feeling. It shows you understand and resonate with the emotional reality of the other person's perspective. You've paid the price to understand them.
And logos.
The logic, the reasoning, the structure of your presentation, the words you use.
And the sequence matters.
Critically, Covey argues the most effective sequence is usually pathos first, then ethos, then logos.
So understand them first, pathos, which builds your credibility, ethos, because they feel you respect them, and then present your logical case.
Exactly. When people feel understood, they become much more open to being influenced by your logic and perspective. Trying to lead with logos, just presenting your rational argument without first establishing understanding and credibility, is often ineffective.
Like that frustrated boss trying to convince his own boss. Just hitting him with logic without understanding the boss's concerns first.
Right. It rarely works. When you take the time to understand deeply first, your own presentation becomes better, more accurate, more tailored, more respectful, addressing the actual concerns.
And this whole process, seeking first to understand, is always within my circle of influence.
Always. You can't force someone else to listen to you, but you can always choose to listen empathically first. It gives you accurate information, builds the EBA, provides that crucial psychological air, and dramatically increases the chances of finding synergistic win-win solutions. It's a powerful habit to cultivate before problems even arise.
We've built trust with the EBA, aimed for win-win, and practiced empathic communication. Now we arrive at habit 6, synergize.
Yes, and Covey positions this as the highest activity in life, the true test and manifestation of all the other habits combined.
Synergy. What does it actually mean in this context? We hear the word a lot in business.
It means, simply put, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. 1 + 1 = 3 or 10 or 100.
How does that happen?
The relationship between the parts is a part in and of itself, and it's the most catalytic, empowering, unifying part. Synergy is about focusing all the previous habits, your proactivity, your clear purpose, your integrity, your win-win attitude, your empathic communication skills on your toughest challenges to create solutions that are far better than what any single person could come up with alone.
So it's about creating something entirely new, a third alternative that wasn't there before.
Exactly. It's not just compromise where 1 + 1 = maybe 1.5. It's true creative cooperation.
Covey called the process terrifying.
Why? Because true synergy requires stepping into the unknown. You don't know exactly what the outcome will be. You have to be willing to let go of your own attachment to your specific solution and genuinely open yourself up to new possibilities.
That requires a lot of internal security.
Enormous security. the kind built through the private victories, habits 1, 2, and 3. You need that solid core of proactivity, clear values, and integrity to feel safe enough to be vulnerable and open in a potentially ambiguous process. You have to leave the comfort zone.
So synergistic communication is about being truly open-minded and open-hearted.
Yes. Open to new possibilities, new alternatives, new options. You might not know the exact end when you start, but you have this inward sense of excitement and security based on the principles that the outcome will be significantly better than what you could achieve alone. That feeling is part of the end in mind for synergy.
It's based on a belief that everyone involved will gain more insight, creating a positive momentum.
Right. But many people haven't experienced true synergy, or they've had bad experiences that made them defensive. They've been trained in defensive, protective communication, or operate from a low-trust EBA.
So they approach collaboration with suspicion.
Or they equate synergy with just being forced into someone else's agenda. Negative experiences can really burn people, making them resistant.
What's the key ingredient that makes positive synergy possible then?
Valuing the differences. This is critical. Synergy isn't about getting everyone to agree or be the same. It's about recognizing that differences in perspective, experience, and opinion are creative opportunities, not threats.
Like the Atomic Energy Commission example Covey cited.
Yes, David Lilienthal described how these highly influential, diverse individuals came together because they had high mutual respect, high EBA. Disagreements didn't lead to opposition or defensiveness. Instead, the attitude was, if a person of your intelligence and competence disagrees with me, there must be something I'm not understanding. Help me see what you see. That created this incredibly open, non-protective, creative culture.
They saw differences as a path to a better solution.
Exactly. Covey illustrates this personally with fishing for the third alternative.
The husband wants to go fishing with the boys. The wife wants to visit her sick mother miles away. A classic conflict.
Right. A typical outcome might be compromise. They split up, or one gives in grudgingly. This often leads to resentment, guilt, unhappiness, a lose-win, or maybe even lose-lose scenario eventually. Low synergy.
So how does the synergistic approach work?
First, you need the foundation. A reasonably high EBA, a commitment to win-win, habit 4, and the skills of empathic communication, habit 5.
Okay, assume that's in place.
Then, instead of seeing each other as adversaries defending positions, they use habit 5 to deeply understand each other's underlying needs and desires. He wants quality time with the boys, a great outdoor experience. She feels a deep need to be with her mother, to show love and support.
They get beyond the surface positions, fishing trip versus mother visit, to the core needs.
Yes. Then, because they trust each other and are committed to a win-win outcome, they pool those desires. They are now on the same side of the table looking at the problem, how to meet both sets of important needs together.
And their energy goes into creative problem solving, not conflict.
Exactly. That negative energy of defensiveness and arguing is transformed into positive, creative energy searching for that third alternative. Maybe they find a great fishing spot near the mother's place. Maybe they go fishing for a few days, then visit the mother, refreshed. Maybe they arrange for the mother to join them somewhere accessible. The specific solution isn't the point.
The point is the process of valuing differences and collaborating to find a solution better than either initial proposal.
Precisely. It requires maturity. Dependent people struggle with this. They try to manipulate. Insecure people try to clone others, wanting everyone to agree with them because differences feel threatening.
Sameness is not oneness, Covey says. Uniformity is not unity.
Unity comes from complementarity, from valuing how differences can complete the whole.
And the key to achieving this interpersonal synergy with others
Lies in achieving interpersonal synergy, first synergy within ourselves.
Yeah.
That integration of character from habits 1, 2, and 3. That internal security allows us to be open and vulnerable with others. It develops the abundance mentality and authenticity needed for synergy.
It's about engaging both sides of the brain, the logical and the creative.
Yes. Principle-centered living helps integrate left brain, logical, analytical, and right brain, creative, intuitive thinking, unlocking our ability to tackle complex problems that logic alone can't solve. Like that example of the husband trying to use pure logic on his wife's feeling of dissatisfaction. They were both right from their perspective, like the old young woman, but stuck because they weren't valuing the difference.
This also applies to groups and organizations dealing with change.
Definitely. Kurt Lewin's force field analysis shows change involves driving forces pushing for it and restraining forces holding it back. Often the restraining forces are emotional, habitual, cultural.
And just increasing the driving forces Pushing harder often increases resistance, like pushing a spring.
Exactly. Synergy works by involving people, valuing their input, even the resistance, seeking to understand it, habit 5, and releasing the restraining forces. Getting genuine involvement unlocks creativity and commitment. It's the essence of effective teamwork and unity. It's the crowning achievement of the habits.
So we've climbed the ladder through private and public victory, culminating in synergy. What keeps it all going? That brings us to the final habit, habit 7. Sharpen the saw.
Yes, the principle of balanced self-renewal. And the analogy Covey uses is simple but incredibly powerful.
The woodcutter sawing frantically.
Right. A man is sawing away for hours, exhausted, making little progress. Someone asks, "Why don't you take a break and sharpen your saw?"
And he replies, "I don't have time to sharpen the saw. I'm too busy sawing."
It perfectly captures how we often neglect the very instrument of our own production ourselves in the name of being productive.
So sharpen the saw means investing in ourselves, regularly renewing our capacity to produce.
Exactly. It means regularly exercising and renewing all 4 dimensions of our nature: physical, spiritual, mental, and social-emotional, in wise and balanced ways.
And this is a quadrant 2 activity, isn't it? Important, but usually not urgent.
Absolutely crucial. It rarely feels urgent, so it gets pushed aside by the tyranny of quadrant crises. Sharpening the saw must be proactively acted upon. Nobody else can do it for us.
It's the single most powerful investment we can make in life. In ourselves, the instrument of our own performance.
Covey argues it is,
Right.
because it preserves and enhances our greatest asset, ourselves, which makes all the other habits possible and sustainable.
Okay, let's break down renewing those 4 dimensions. First, the physical dimension.
This involves caring effectively for our physical body, eating well, getting sufficient rest and relaxation, and exercising regularly.
Exercise often falls into that important but not urgent trap.
Big time. We think we don't have time, but Covey flips it. We don't have time not to. The positive impact of regular exercise on the energy, clarity, and resilience you bring to the rest of your week, the other 165 hours or so, is immense.
It doesn't have to be intense marathon training.
Not necessarily. It should be a balanced program you enjoy and can sustain, building endurance, flexibility, and strength wisely. Start slowly, be proactive. Make it a habit 3 commitment based on your habit 2 values. The benefits go far beyond just physical health.
Okay. Second, the spiritual dimension. What does that encompass?
This is about connecting to the core of your life, your commitment to your value system. It provides leadership to your life
How do you renew this dimension?
through activities that connect you to that core. For Covey, it involved daily reading of scriptures, meditation, prayer. For others, it might be spending time in nature, listening to great music, deep contemplation, reading inspiring literature, clarifying values. It's about that daily private victory, spending time with your fundamental principles.
Like Dr. Gordon's prescription you mentioned earlier. Listening to nature, examining motives, letting go of worries.
Yes, practices that foster perspective, humility, gratitude, and connection to something larger than oneself. It fuels the conscience, aligns you with timeless truths.
Third, the mental dimension. Sharpening the mind.
Yes, primarily through continuing education, honing and expanding the mind beyond formal schooling. This means proactively seeking out new knowledge and perspectives.
Reading good literature is key here.
Covey emphasizes it as a high-leverage quadrant 2 activity. The person who doesn't read is no better off than the person who can't read. He suggests setting goals: read a book a month or a week. Read broadly great books, biographies, current affairs, professional journals, and practice habit 5 while reading. Seek first to understand the author's intent before judging.
Writing is also powerful for mental renewal. Keeping a journal.
Yes, organizing thoughts, learning clarity. Planning and organizing also sharpen the mental saw, applying habits 2 and 3. He also warns about television. It can be a huge time sink that dulls the mind if not managed proactively with habit 3 discrimination.
Good servant, poor master.
Exactly.
And fourth, the social-emotional dimension. How is this renewed?
This dimension centers on our relationships, our connections with others. Renewal here happens primarily through the day-to-day practice of the interdependent habits. Habits 4, 5, and 6. Making deposits in others' emotional bank accounts. Thinking win-win. Seeking to understand. Synergizing.
So it's not necessarily a separate activity, but integrated into our interactions.
Largely, yes, but it also involves intrinsic security. Your sense of self-worth shouldn't be dependent on how others treat you. That comes from the private victories. However, our greatest joy and fulfillment often come through deep, meaningful relationships, which require ongoing renewal efforts.
He talks about the social mirror here, too.
Yes, the idea that we often form our sense of self based on the perceptions and opinions of those around us. Proactively choosing to reflect a clear, undistorted, positive vision of others, affirming their potential, their worth, their proactive nature, is a powerful way to renew this dimension, both for them and for ourselves.
Like the poet Knight, seeing Dulcinea not as she was, but as she could be, making deposits of unconditional love.
A beautiful illustration. Believing in others' unseen potential, using imagination over memory, refusing to label them based on past behavior. This investment helps them grow and strengthens the connection.
This renewal concept applies to organizations too.
Absolutely. Organizations also have these four dimensions: economic, physical, talent development, mental, human relations, social emotional, and purpose integrity, spiritual. Neglecting any dimension weakens the whole. Balanced renewal is key for organizational health and effectiveness.
So habit 7 isn't just one more thing to do, it integrates and enables all the others.
Precisely. It keeps the engine running and makes growth possible. Physical renewal reinforces habit 1, proactivity. Spiritual renewal reinforces habit 2, purpose, principles. Mental renewal reinforces habit 3, management, learning. Social emotional renewal fuels habits 4, 5, and 6.
And this leads to the idea of the upward spiral.
Yes. Renewal is the process that allows us to move upward along a spiral of growth. Each iteration involves learning, committing, and doing at a higher level. You revisit the habits, but with deeper understanding and greater capacity.
So you never really arrive.
No, it's a process of continuous improvement. Habit 1 at a basic level is recognizing the space between stimulus and response. At a higher level, it might be forgiving someone who deeply wronged you or refusing to take offense. The principles remain the same, but our ability to live them grows.
The law of the harvest applies. You reap what you sow through consistent renewal and application of principles.
Exactly. There are no shortcuts to real growth.
And the 8th habit he wrote about later.
That addresses the shift to the knowledge worker age, moving beyond just effectiveness to finding your unique voice and inspiring others to find theirs, achieving greatness, significance, passionate contribution. It builds on the 7 habits, but addresses a different dimension.
Finally, Covey ends with this idea of living life in crescendo.
A beautiful concept. His hope for his own legacy was rooted in his family. No other success can compensate for failure in the home, he often said. But crescendo.
The musical term playing with ever greater energy, strength, striding.
Yes. It means believing your most important work is always ahead of you, never behind you. Retirement isn't about stopping, it's about shifting contribution, always seeking higher challenges, deeper understanding, more meaningful service, and love.
A powerful call to continuous growth and contribution right to the end.
Absolutely. Living the 7 habits isn't about reaching a finish line. It's about embarking on that upward spiral, continually sharpening the saw, and making an ever-increasing difference.
Wow. We've journeyed through the really profound principles of the 7 habits of highly effective people. From understanding our paradigms and the power of choice.
To living with purpose and integrity, building trust, fostering collaboration, and embracing that crucial habit of continuous renewal.
This deep dive has really shown that true effectiveness isn't just about tips and tricks. It's truly an inside-out journey, deeply rooted in these timeless principles.
It really is. And as we conclude this deep dive, maybe we can leave you with a provocative thought to ponder, something Covey himself might ask.
What's the question?
What is the one thing, the most important thing you know you need to start doing in your personal life, or perhaps in your professional life, that if you did it on a regular basis would make a tremendous positive difference?
Just one thing that would have the greatest positive impact.
Listen to your inner voice, your conscience, that quiet voice of wisdom and self-awareness within you. It often holds the key.
That's a powerful question to sit with.
It is. And remember, the 7 habits ultimately are designed to give you your life back. The power to choose, to discover your deepest purposes, to program your own future based on principles.
They remind you that you are responsible and that interdependence, working cooperatively, synergistically, is actually a higher, more mature state of being than just independence.
Change is definitely hard, we know that. But by consistently trying to follow your conscience, committing to these principles, even imperfectly, you really can embark on your own upward spiral of growth, continually learning, committing, and doing.
A journey worth taking. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.